Okay, today I thought we'd do a short video on repairing these vintage tin robots. They were sold under various different names. Most of the boxes are going to say battery operated and then the word robot in bold letters. Also referred to as Zoomer robot. One with the two lights in the eyes. Radar robot. I mean, there are a lot of radar robots and there are a lot of Zoomer robots, so it's kind of common names. But I guess it's better than just the box saying robot, which is what most of the boxes said. There's also, these are the battery operated versions. They, see if we can get this on screen. They have a single C-cell battery that goes into the chest. And there is a wind-up version. It would normally have an opening in the chest for sparks to come out, you know, a flint wheel and sparks and walking. But I thought what we would do first is, well, maybe let's just do a little demo of these guys operating. See, this one has a single light in the head. And you only have 1.5 volts to work with here, a single C-cell battery. And these came out in the mid-1950s. So that battery had to not only run the motor for the walking action, but it also had to run the light. Carbon batteries back then didn't last all that long. And carbon batteries back then actually weigh half as much, or maybe even lighter, than modern batteries, so it kind of throws the balance of the toys off too. Now this version is the one that has the dual lights, so not only were they running a motor and two lights all off one little C-cell. You can imagine how long or it didn't last back in the 1950s before it'd suck a battery dry. This one is very similar to the first one. It was just actually was a donor robot, junk bot, that I made some parts for, so we can get it going. But we're going to cover all that. So consider this rusted junk bot was a donor robot to begin with. But this really all started, let's zoom in up here on my computer monitor and get you a little bit closer, if possible. So if you're not following Ozzy on YouTube and you like vintage toys, you probably should. I got it somewhat square, but you can see Ozzy's robots. You can find them on YouTube. This was a particular video we did of these toys that he was going to send me one to see if I could fix them, and I posted most of the information on Alphadrome. If you go to alphadrome.net, and then you'll have this image come up. This section takes you into the robot talk and all those kind of forums where we type and stuff in, and this section takes you into archives, pictures and images of the vintage toys and information thereof. So normally I'd start here. In this case, there's a lot of different sections. If you've never been to Alphadrome, here's your robot talk. There's a general, which I've never understood. A bot stock, we used to have yearly get-togethers, but that's kind of died down due to the world conditions. You go into different areas. Here's one where there's robot patents. That's where I've put almost all the patents I could find for robot toys. Space guns, if you're into space guns and that kind of stuff. We do spaceships, space guns, space people, spaceships, space figures. The 3D printed section is going to be here. A lot of my projects and other guys' projects are there. You can join Alphadrome and put your projects in there. 3D printed spare parts hasn't really grown too much yet. Here goes into space character and heroes, tips and tricks, various collections. If you have a collection and you want to post pictures, you can go in there and do your own thing there. Papercraft still is alive. It's just kind of hidden down here. For sale, wanted, off topic. We put a lot of fun things down there. In this case, in Robot Talk, I started a thread on these three robots, repairing Battery operated robots in Zoomer. This is where I'm going to post the video that I'm shooting right now. You're going to be part of it. I'm going to replace this text with this video. So basically, Ozzy had sent me 3 robots, 2 of which he wanted repaired, and the third was a donor parts to get the other 2 working. And I believe this is the donor one. I didn't take a lot of pictures of stripping it down. Well, actually, no, there's the new wire. So these pictures aren't completely in order. So this is actually this robot right here being repaired and put back together. This robot right here, as Ozzy had bought it, had the battery box stripped out, this light holder and light stripped out, these 3 motor parts, this plate, this upper plate, and the motor all stripped out. So basically it was a gutted robot. So from the donor robot he sent me, I needed to make this one complete and work again. And here you can kind of see, this is with the battery box. This is reassembling the good one before the battery box got put in. Here's where the motor sits. Here you can see how the battery box tabs in from this side angle in the motor. The problem was the donor motor. This is the plate that the motor sits on, not the upper part, but the lower base plate. Moving the parts over to the new frame from the old, basically. And here's the motor, how it sits into the plate. Then there's a top cap that goes over it. This huge magnet sticks out the back of the robot. On the backs of the robot they have this pack, and that's actually just to hide the fact that the back of the electric motor hung out there. And the motor didn't run, so one of the first things you have to do when you get an old motor that isn't running is, if you can remove the brushes, you take the fiber plate off and pull the brushes so that you can get in and clean the commutator. But you want to make sure you put a little bit of lube back on there. Otherwise the brushes will wear out really quickly. I like to use a graphite impregnated lithium grease. And so you get the motor cleaned up, light oil on the bushings on the end so it doesn't squeal. And now we've jumped to the inside of the head. That's an eye hole, for example, and that's half a mouth slot. This is a part of the switch area. There's these tabs that hold ear cups on. Here are the ear cups. There's a tab there and there. Because the robot had been opened up by somebody else before, they'd managed to break a tab off, so there wasn't going to be any way to hold the robot back together properly. Gluing isn't really an option. So he soldered in a new tab. There's one of the old ones that still existed. Ended up having to do that on both sides. The switches themselves, these are pictures of the one off the Rust Bot, but it was the only one I took a lot of close-up pictures of, but they're all the same. Well, almost all the same. The switches themselves have several problems in the design when they have to last 60 years like they've lasted now. Basically, this one wiper, which gets crimped onto a shaft, is making contact with an aluminum rivet. Well, the aluminum rivets always corrode. They oxidize. So you got to clean that off, and of course clean the underside of that contact. But on the inside, this is where the wire solders on. Here's the other side of that rivet, right there. This is it on the inside. So in order to make a connection, because you can't solder to aluminum, they soldered to this piece of metal, and this crimp goes over it. Well, when that aluminum oxidizes, you don't even get a good electrical connection between this and this, much less the oxidization that happens on the top cover where it has to rub. This round-headed rivet is missing a fiber washer that normally would go there, that holds it out. The battery, the plus side of the battery, it literally touches onto this. And then that shaft that you're looking at comes all the way through and presses into this piece, which then makes connection to there. Well, in some of these, this piece, in this case this one's brass, is also aluminum. So when it's the ones that's also aluminum, you now have the problem of the oxidized aluminum cap here not conducting electricity well, the connection between it and this wiper piece not working very well, the connection between this and this now. So you can kind of get the idea that the different types of metals weren't all that happy working together. This is another picture of it, how it comes together. Took the cap off so that I could wire brush it and clean it up. Put some liquid chrome paint on it so it would look a little bit better. In this particular case, this was the one from the Rust Bot. Since it was missing that fiber washer, I snapped in a small rubber O-ring, and I've got a piece of cardboard shim holding the O-ring in place and tight as well. It does a couple of things. One, it holds this pin this way so that this all stays tight and can make contact. But you have to make sure that this can't short against this, otherwise the switch would pretty much be on all the time. So here is the next robot. That would be this guy, the one with the two eyes. Pretty much stripped down. As you can see, he had his two eye lights, he still had his battery holder, he still had a motor. Here's all the little bits and pieces. You have to take the whole thing down to get in there. And here it is with the motor off, and you're going, why is the motor off? Well, the motor didn't run, so that meant you needed to take that out and get the motor running. But even beyond that, even when I got the motor running, it isn't engaging with the crown gear. I think I've got some pictures coming up later that shows the connection between the motor and the crown gear. So we'll come back to that. But it had a mechanical problem where even with the motor running, and actually this, you just heard this one run a second ago when it was the noisiest of them. It's got a lot of wear, and there's not a lot you're going to be able to do about that when they get a whole lot of wear. On the antennas, they originally on all of these have this rubber washer, grommet on the inside, which would get pinched between this little case, which is meant to hold where that motor sticks out the back, like I told you, and the grommet would rub on the back side of the body, and that would add just a little bit of friction. So if you pull the antenna up and down, like so, it would stay in the position you put it in. Well, those rubber grommets always have turned solid and usually have disintegrated, so they don't work. You can't really get in there to replace that grommet unless you want to disturb the crimp on the end, which I normally don't want to do. So I normally would go in with a folded piece of metal or even cardboard on the inside and wedge it in between the back and the rod, and that'll add enough friction so the antenna will stay in the position. I think my dog wants outside. Hang on. Okay, two dogs outside. That should buy at least a half a minute peace and quiet, right? Okay, moving on. Next problem I found on the bottom of the double-eyed robot, the gray body, red-legged one, the one we were just talking about, is the rubber wheels had completely dry rotted and gone solid and had flat spots and fallen apart where the axle holes in the center had given up. So the robot was never going to walk with those wheels. So the only solution I could come up with would be to have modeled some new ones and 3D printed them, added a rubber grommet for traction. There's one back here too, you can't just see it. The ratchet happens on one side of the wheel, so the rubber grommet favors the other side. It's the same design that the original rubber wheels had prior. And you can see the ratchet arm there. And there, that's that guy together, and there's that guy together. Now let's move on. So now I wanted to see if I could salvage the Rust Bot, now that we'd removed so many valuable parts from it. Now here you can see that crown gear I was talking about earlier. These two, well, four, are where that motor plate sits, and the motor shaft goes straight down inside and engages that crown gear. The problem was finding a motor that had a long enough shaft. That crown gear was way down in there. You need a whole lot of shaft. So I went digging through all my spare parts, and I found this motor that I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm about 90% sure that it came out of the reproduction pug robot. That's one of the Robbie robots, one version of them called the pug. And it had a long shaft with the brass gear on the end. And so then all I had to do then is I didn't want to permanently modify anything in this robot. I wanted to be able to undo it and reverse it in case someday the original parts ever turned up anywhere in another totally garbage robot. So I made a metal plate that I could tab in. I didn't bother to tab it in the back for this particular case. I put a tab on this side and a tab on that side and soldered my new motor to this steel plate. That way, if the real parts ever turned up, I could just straighten a couple of tabs and lift that out and put in the proper motor. Now you can see how the plate sits in there, how long the shaft had to be in the brass gear, engaging the crown gear, as you normally would call a pinion gear in the crown gear. Then I had to fabricate, this is test fitting showing how it's going to sit in there. It's actually, see in the old one, the large magnet would stick out this opening in the back that cover would hide. Now I needed to fabricate the battery holder that goes up and holds the light bulb for the eyes. So I made that out of brass because it would be fairly easy to work with and it would hold the bend. And I just happened to have a box of 1.5 volt bulbs, so this one actually lights up brighter than some of the others. Had the same problem in this robot in that its rubber wheel feet in the bottom were dry rotted and ruined, so I had to 3D print for it as well. Here it is just with the one side on so that you can get a view of how all that looks. And it also took the what used to be chromed parts off the Rust Bot. I took them out to the wire wheel and cleaned them all up as best I could, and then went over them with some of the liquid chrome. You know, the stuff that I prefer to use. Right here. And you can brush it on or airbrush it, either way. Looks better than normal chrome paints. And that refill bottle will last a long time. And redid those parts. Just the painted one over here, actually. You can see turned out looking as good or better than that untouched chrome part there. And so that's basically it. If you want to look at these pictures on your own time or in real time, then you can go to the website. I'll try to put a link down below to get you into the Alphadrome website. And I'll put a link to this video if you want to watch Ozzy's video, because toys left to repair are going to be the what's the proper name for that? TV Spaceman. And there's a spaceship flying toy over here that I'll get into last because it's going to need some of the most difficult repairs, let's put it that way. So I think that's it for this video. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't. It lets me know that you care about this type of content. And I'll see you in this, consider this part 1, I guess, and this will probably be part 2, and that'll be probably part 3. All right, talk to you later.